This case is really fascinating because it's our introduction to the entire series. It has this pervasive insistence on explaining how Ace Attorney works, almost more than it does on telling an interesting or nuanced story. I think this case is fun, but there isn't too much to chew on in terms of interesting, rich ideas or complicated logic like I think the series really shines at later on. We are forced to engage with this text in terms of what it is interested in establishing. The core gameplay loop of Ace Attorney, the tone, our major characters, and really the themes this game spends every one of its full-length cases referencing are brought into existence here, and from scratch no less. There is no previous case, game, or franchise to reference. The writing in Turnabout Sisters makes or breaks Turnabout Samurai, Goodbyes, every subsequent Turnabout, and every subsequent game in the decades-old franchise that may or may not be made if this case flops. And with all of that in mind, I have only one word to say.
Yes, I am. What? Alright, whatever. Chapter 1 of 1. Turnabout Sisters is better than you remember.
The second half of this case is dominated by its mystery. We're done showing you how to move around and introducing Edgeworth, Maya, and Gumshoe, and now we focus on catching the killer. A killer whose identity, by the way, we do already know. I can't overstate this. It is a genre-defying decision to show the player who the killer is in this story inspired by mystery stories. The name for this narrative framework is very funny to me. Instead of a traditional whodunit, Ace Attorney is an example of a how catch 'em, or an inverted detective story. The reason for this is very profound and is twofold. The first reason is that we're playing a game and are directly involved in the proceedings. We don't have the luxury of watching someone else solve this case and being taken along on a ride with them. We are in the driver's seat. It winds up being very important and rewarding to have a bird's eye view of this case. In other words, seeing who the culprit is. This begs the question of why games in a similar vein like Danganronpa and Zero Escape, which are also games and also have some ludus, treat their mysteries more traditionally, barring them from the player until the characters are all on the same page. In my opinion, and as I mentioned in my recent Danganronpa video, these mystery games can introduce their fiction with total confidence in its premise, since Ace Attorney had proven its formula to work so effectively as video games. The second reason is that this tradition has been part of the language and dressing that Ace Attorney uses for years and like a dozen games since, but it started as this cautious and measured attempt to make palatable that which seemed impossible in 2001, a game set in court. At the end of court day 1, something clicked with me when I was playing this for the first time. I knew April May didn't do it, but she was clearly guilty of something using the language of the game in her breakdown. The presence of someone else at the hotel with April May suddenly links her and this guy in pink in the player's mind, and their color schemes and involvement with the hotel and crime sent off bells. Pursuing April May in court was exciting, and I forgot what the point of the trial was, to catch the real killer who we've seen before but haven't been thinking about since the first few seconds of the case. We moved to something as the player we didn't know was possible previously. Investigation Day 2. How exactly do you make an entirely fresh and new sequence of investigation without treading over the same sequences and evidence as the first day? We're not going to have anyone die here, we're not going to investigate the scene of the crime again or meet the accused, and we've already been to most of the important places we're going to go. We need new people, new testimony, new evidence. And so, we get Red White, who we recognize as the real culprit. I've heard the complaint that it's narratively unsatisfying to meet the culprit late into the investigation, but I don't really care. I think this is good. Recall that we're not really trying to solve a mystery. The game isn't giving us a list of suspects and asking us who we think did it. It's telling us a story and giving us the experience of catching a killer in court. We meet April May in the detention center, and I think she's funny here. Her expression and eye twitch are very funny. Next, we move to the law office of Grossberg, and here's the payoff to this important background design. Again, we spend a lot of time here. I'll be impressed if anybody knows exactly what's on this shelf or desk, but because dead center, drawn very clearly and strikingly, is this painting when we come in first, it's the defining characteristic of this location, and seeing it missing with a different color paint behind it after Grossberg said he refuses to sell it is really good design. We do a bit of back and forth and find out that Red White, president of Blue Corp, is the mystery man who checked in with April May. And again, this is explicit text. If April May couldn't have done it, that leaves him. That, combined with us having seen him do it, primes the pump for the framing of all subsequent interactions with him. And the first thing we notice in Blue Corp is Grossberg's painting of this dude. Red White walks in and his first lines are, "Furnish me with the title of your personage. I was inquirably asking the title you go by. Phoenix, right? Splendiferous." There's an interesting little localization joke here. In English, the joke is that this guy uses long words constantly and incorrectly. It paints him as this pompous, dumb asshole. In Japanese, however, Red White mentions that he spent some time in America and knows how to speak English. Instead of big words, Red White in the original Japanese release says words in English constantly, not seeming to understand what he's saying all the time and not nailing the pronunciation. The cool thing is that this joke in Japanese wouldn't really work if you tried to translate it directly to English, so they translated the tone of it. In the Japanese version, when you meet him, he says, "Wa cha a ne I n ma." What's your name? What's your name? Later in court, in the original Japanese version, this exchange takes place. Edgeworth, will the witness give their name? White, yes, I am. Edgeworth, I'm asking for your name. White, sorry. I've lived in America for a long time. I'm the president of Konaka Culture. No, Presidento. I think this joke is funny in English and in Japanese. In his office, we confront Red White with a DL6 incident, with the wiretapping equipment he and April May were using for their blackmail company, and with the painting he blackmailed off Grossberg, which we recognize instantly. Upon confronting him, we get a shaky black screen and Phoenix says, he punched me. Red White calls the police, says Phoenix is the real culprit and he's ready to testify against him in court tomorrow. Let's talk about Red White now that we're here. I was half surprised to see that a ton of people talk about how weak of a villain they think Red White is, and I sort of don't feel that. This is the first proper case, and like we talked about last time, it was the first case written by Takumi and the intended first case of the entire series. We have lots of time to meet more menacing villains, more intelligent villains, and more sympathetic villains. In terms of establishing a thematic identity for this game though, Red White is the exact perfect villain to start this game with. He isn't terribly menacing in court. Really, we dunk on him the whole time he's there. But in this moment, he's at his most intimidating, the one where he punches Phoenix and tells you there's nothing you can do about it. Outside of the court sections where the score and script empower us as the player, we are sort of helpless. This isn't the first time this trick is used in the game, where out of court we're made to feel weak. Red White's real strength as a villain is to tell us clearly what this game is about, so D. Vasquez, Von Karma, and even Gant in the bonus case can iterate on this thematic centerpiece. In the second game, Justice for All, the central premise to me seems to be identity, who we are and who we pretend to be. In the third game, Trials and Tribulations, this central idea is love, unrequited, lost, and unbreaking. Apollo Justice has a few ideas, but the clearest in my opinion is in Succession, those who follow us and the way that they inherit our legacy. The Great Ace Attorney probably does the best job of any of these games at having a strong, well-written message it spends time engaging with meaningfully in culture, diffusion, industrialization, and the preservation of heritage. Red White embodies the central idea of the first Ace Attorney game as the embodiment of overwhelming power and doing what's right in the face of it. I'll return to this idea soon. This is the first of 3 times we're threatened or made victim of violence out of court, and the first of 4 times where we face off against a villain with immense structural power who preys upon the weak by leaning on their strength under support of the system. I think there's a slight misstep in making Phoenix the accused here, although I understand someone arguing that this just reinforces that Red White can do and say whatever they want with impunity, even changing his story completely and accusing someone new randomly who no evidence points to. For me though, this isn't really believable because Phoenix doesn't make sense as the accused. This seems like a bad lie told by a powerful bad liar, and because I think the player and Phoenix would kind of both rather that Phoenix sit in the defendant chair than Maya. I know Phoenix would prefer that, and I know the player who has seen Maya on the phone with Mia, seen the real killer, and felt really bad for Maya, who's had all these sad drawings and sad songs play for her, also feel that way. We go back to Grossberg and finally hear from him what White's blackmailing him over and what the DL6 incident is. I think this early characterization of one of the big mysteries that persists through the game and wraps up nicely in the last case is excellent. I think Grossberg here is excellent and serves as the embodiment of what Phoenix isn't. Grossberg tells us that White owns judges, police officers, and politicians, and defeating him in court will be impossible. And this, strictly speaking, is excellent setup and true. Grossberg is someone with power who cannot bring themselves to do the right thing. Grossberg has money, connections, and years of experience as a lawyer. Mia recommends him as the first lawyer to defend Maya if anything happens to her. Like the teacher in Phoenix Wright's childhood classroom, he is positioned structurally to help the weak if he can be brave or trusting to. And in a really interesting framing, his connections and status as a lawyer and money from Red White are exactly what he stands to lose if he defends Maya. He has every advantage we, as Phoenix, don't have, and he stands to lose it all if he does what's right. We move to court and are threatened by Edgeworth, who mentions that if he objects, he has it on good authority that the judge will listen, since he's in White's pocket. He says he'll do anything for a guilty verdict. Guilty will always lie, and all he can do is hope to get everyone declared guilty. This is fun. I like this as something that's important to Phoenix and Edgeworth, and both of them have a lot of maturation to do about this thing they're both sort of pointing at now. Edgeworth, who defended Phoenix when he was weak and disempowered, has now been made weak himself after the death of his father. Edgeworth is really good in this game, and really good in this case. Red White takes the stand. His animation is quite good. I really like his posing. And I think the joke with his speech is very funny. Maybe the English version could hit this a little bit harder with some sort of visual emphasis on the joke like the Japanese version does by adding some kind of style to the text like these little dots. As is, he just kind of speaks strangely and with a lot of fluff to match the script in Japanese where he's saying words in English. Red White testifies, we catch him on a few obvious contradictions, and there's this really delicious change in his posing as he starts to get nervous and stops speaking in English or with large words quite as much. He complains that his stomach hurts, and Phoenix in the English version tells him to deal with it. This is almost over. We get him again, and this breakdown and next set of poses is so wonderful. Edgeworth objects and has this really cool scene of being treated by the script and soundtrack as far above Red White and on par with Phoenix in terms of competency, as he tells Red White to confess to the wiretapping on the phone, but not the murder. We have one more big contradiction to make as Maya channels Mia Fey to give us the hint about the receipt. We'll talk more about the paranormal and supernatural in later videos, but suffice it to say that I think this serves as good drama and theater and makes the dry courtroom a bit more dynamic. The final nail goes into Red White's coffin, but Edgeworth bails him out by asking for a second day of trial, before which he can fix evidence. Mia interrupts and hands Phoenix a list he begins reading. The list of people in finance, celebrities, etc. Red White's face contorts, and now, having completely cornered him, and by inverting that which gives him power as the only thing through Mia's bravery and persistence which can take it away from him, he confesses his guilt. We, as Phoenix Wright, who had a well-characterized reason for wanting to do what's right and protect the weak against structural power and oppression, are the diametric opposite of Grossberg, who refuses to protect an innocent girl he was asked to look out for after her last immediate family member is killed. And only when two unassailable forces for good, Mia's strength and bravery to pursue White, and Phoenix Wright's desire to protect the weak and get vengeance for his mentor, combine in court with supernatural aid, is Red White caught and Maya declared innocent. So Phoenix and Maya are both declared innocent. Phoenix gets a chance to say goodbye to his mentor, and Turnabout Sisters plays. Phoenix and Maya begin a friendship, and she decides his name sounds like Nick instead of Phoenix, like the original does with Naruhodo-kun and Naruhodo Ryuichi. I find this moment really touching. Their shared bond over the loss of someone important to them, and the beginning of their friendship as partners as they go out together for burgers or miso ramen. This case is certainly a little light on logic and really grand, interesting ideas, but for my money, it's almost perfect in terms of structure, intrigue, flow, and setting up interesting ideas. Think about all of the villains in subsequent cases that utilize structural, overwhelming power. This game is about something, and Red White really teased that up perfectly in my opinion. I really enjoy this case because it has a very clear voice and isn't shy about developing it and the ideas it'll deliver on in every subsequent case, even a decade later for the Western remakes. I tend to prefer cases that have breathing room to be a little silly and focus on the mystery, but for a case that is firmly embedded in the main central narrative of the game and series, I don't think a first case could have done any better at establishing itself than Turnabout Sisters did. As always, thank you for your time.
Goodbye forever!